Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Nonprofit Show. You know, this is budgeting time for a lot of nonprofits in our country. And there are 1.8 million of us, so there's a lot of things cooking. Our guest today, Dr. Stephanie Rose-Belcher, the COO of JMT Consulting, is going to be talking to us a little bit about strategy and how we need to marry that with our budgeting. Stephanie, welcome. I think you're going to rattle some cages today.
Hopefully not. Hopefully we're giving common sense advice and things that people intuitively know about and just need to put into practice.
I love it. Well, it's all about rowing in the same direction. And I think that this is going to be a really cool conversation to have, especially this time of year. You know, it's also really cool, our amazing partners. And one of them is JMT Consulting. They're a fintech company that does amazing integrations for accounting software, financial management, and their tools. We'll have Stephanie talk a little bit more about that. But we also have amazing partners that include Staffing Boutique, American Nonprofit Academy, Bloomerang, Your Part-Time Controller, Interim Executives Academy, and Fundraisers Friday. I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. But more importantly, Dr. Stephanie Rose-Belcher, Chief Operating Officer of JMT Consulting. Now, I gave the quick once-over about JMT as I know you all, and when I'm making an introduction or talking about you. Stephanie, you tell me what JMT Consulting does.
Thanks, Julia. Well, first and foremost, JMT Consulting is a 35-year-old consulting firm, and we always like to preface that with female-founded, female-owned, and female-run, and we think that's pretty incredible over that entire 35 years. The JMT is focused solely on the nonprofit sector, and what we're really doing is bringing software, expertise, and services to the nonprofit finance department. So we're delivering and recommending the best accounting software, financial management software, back office technologies that will enable the finance department to really streamline, become more efficient, and focus on how they support the nonprofit's mission. And again, we do that through expert advice, consulting, implementation of technology, outsourced accounting services, and many other things.
Yeah, it's really an interesting time. I mean, think about 35 years ago, what the business landscape was, what the nonprofit management landscape was, and then to think about all of these incredible changes that are coming forth daily, just AI alone. I would imagine your team at JMT is like on their toes, just looking at new things all the time.
That's an understatement. If you think about 35 years ago, I don't even think we were using Excel. So that's right. It was precursors to and it was paper and pencils. And we moved into software that was on premise that would enable and support the accounting function. The taxes still being done, audits still being done manually. And we move into the cloud. And now we add AI, which is bringing sort of smart rules and the elimination of repetitive accounting tasks. It's streamlining and improving the budgeting process, helping with the scenario planning. So it's been an amazing evolution from just very labor intensive manual things through to technology that supports that finance team in a way that lets them be experts and lets them actually help support and guide their organization, as opposed to being task oriented and gotta enter these transactions, gotta prove the expenses, gotta pay the bills, right? It's changes the whole dynamic of what the finance professional does. And when you think about speeding and making an efficient finance department, that lets that finance team really be an asset for the nonprofit. They become advisors. They become people that not just report the news, but can help influence the organization.
I love that. And that kind of takes us to step number one in when we're thinking about marrying strategy to our budgets. And you advise us to understand what the annual budget looks like. But before that, you told me in the green room, we need to kind of take a step back and readdress that word strategy again. What do you mean by that?
So you can't really build a budget without a strategy. Every organization, and they all are nonprofits do this, how sophisticated, how frequent, how in depth they do it is probably a pretty broad spectrum. But a strategic plan has to be established. The organization needs to know, what does it want to do over the next 3 to 5 years? Who does it want to serve? How is it going to serve them? Where do they expect to grow? And if they're expecting to grow, how do they expect to support that growth, through what funding mechanisms? And you have to lay that plan out, and then you get to build a budget. And then that budget needs to be constantly updated and modified as the strategic plan modifies. And the other really kind of crucial thing within that strategic plan is, how are you measuring your success? What are those key performance indicators that let you know that you're meeting your plan? You're meeting the revenue goal, you're meeting the program delivery goal, you're meeting the expansion goal. Maybe you want to build a building that's going to, add new programming. Maybe, that's awesome, right? And you've come up with a strategy to get the money to build the building, but a building doesn't maintain itself just because you built it. There's ongoing costs that have to be factored in. There's ongoing program costs, ongoing resource costs. So when you just think about, I want to grow and I want to add to my program, and I've got to get some money to do that. It's not just that initial funding, but it's the sustainability of that program over time. And so that all is part of your strategic plan. Then you can start your annual budget cycle. So that's what I mean by marrying strategy and budget.
Yeah. And I love that you bring this up, because I feel like a lot of times the conflict arises when we have different groups of people doing different things, and we haven't all met in the middle. And then the frustration just grows because we're kind of rudderless in some ways. Or certain groups think that they have it down and they have a plan, but then that plan doesn't really fit with what this group is doing. I mean, it's really fraught with a lot of tension that, to your point, if we can get this figured out first, it seems like it's going to be a lot smoother. I want to move into talking about another strategy that you talked about, and that is scenario planning. And I feel like a lot of folks were pushed into this during COVID, and that they thought, oh, this is just a COVID thing, as opposed to a best practice. And I'm wondering if you could kind of talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. I think, as you build a budget, which again aligns back to the strategic plan in terms of the programming that the nonprofit wants to deliver. What are the costs, the ongoing costs of that? Not just, the admin to run the nonprofit, but what are the costs for all the programs, whether it's staff, whether it's volunteer resources, whether it's buildings, whether it's delivering healthcare. It doesn't matter the specifics, but the ongoing costs for the year to run the programs. What are the various revenue streams? What is the guarantee on those revenue streams? What new advancements is the organization trying to make, and what are the revenue streams for those advancements? You have to put all of that together, and then you need to, and you can build your budget at a program level and at an overall level, but you also need to say, what if we didn't get that money for the new program? What if we lost our money for an existing program? And, my best practice is typically to build at least 3 budgets: a best case, my expected case, and my worst case. And we'll probably talk about this some more, but that's why you get a tool. This is not an Excel spreadsheet exercise. Yeah. By the way, this is not the CFO's job alone, or whoever's in charge of budgeting and planning. And this goes straight back to your comment about making sure groups aren't in conflict. Everybody puts their hands together with the board and all the key leaders of the organization on that strategic plan, they don't go away. And you say, oh, okay, CFO, you handle the rest of it. That's not how this works. A budget doesn't work in a vacuum. Not in the build, in the assessment, and the monitoring, because all of those leaders have to provide their crucial inputs. Well, great. Here's how I'm going to run the program. Here's the cost of the program. Here's how I'm going to do, new development funds, because again, I'm stuck on building a building. We're building a house. So I think that's where my brain is. But you want a new facility, you got to get money for that facility. But again, you also have to plan for those ongoing costs of that new facility. So, you build your best case scenario, which is if everything, all the stars aligned, everything was perfect. I got all the money, all the programs ran exactly as planned without cost overruns. That's my best case. Here's what's practical and real. And then what happens if I lose money here, or I lose funding here, or maybe there's some catastrophic change like a COVID that changes how we deliver programming and increase the cost of the program. So your revenue might have been okay, but your cost calculus changes because some external factor has changed. For organizations that rely on things like, gas, the fluctuation in gas prices can have a serious impact on your planning. So again, my view is you're doing at least 3 budgets, and frankly, every quarter to, depending on size, every quarter to twice a year, you're doing a recast and you're again running those scenario plans.
I love that you mentioned that, and we'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about benchmarking, but the way you phrase things, it makes me think that defining the budget as a living, breathing thing is really important versus saying, okay, this is it. It's written in stone. That's it. Right. And so I appreciate you kind of saying, look, it's a tool, and it's a part of how we operate. That means we have to operate it as well. It has to operate us, but we have to operate it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Many finance organizations will actually, they've got their budget, they've got their guide, and as actuals come in, they'll reforecast every month. Again, that's going to be sort of an organizational decision and a size decision, because the bigger you are, the more complex you are. Frankly, you should get closer to that recast every month, and communicate, right? It's not again the CFO, the finance team in a vacuum. It's, hey team, hey program director, hey fund development managers, here's where we're at. Here, we had a strategic plan that we were going to do these things. We are falling off from our plan. Here's where we're going to, as a team, have to make decisions to make adjustments, whether that's decisions on program delivery, whether that's changes in where we look for funding, all that kind of stuff has to be done rigorously. It's not a one and done thing. And right. I do see that people build a budget, want it done, and then it's just the finance person maybe talking to the executive director or the finance committee on the board about how the money's going, and then over on the left hand, the fund development manager's going, here's what I did, and the program manager's going, here's what I did. Right. Those groups have to be working in concert.
Right. So that kind of leads into the next point that we want to chat about, and that is aligning those program goals to development goals and everything else. I think that what you said is really interesting, because it seems to me that when we're setting up these goals, and I hear this all the time from development professionals and even program managers, they don't step back and figure out what necessarily is coming in, or even communicate back over to the development team of what they need in order to fund this program. And it's a really interesting problem, because it seems to me that it just builds confrontation And I'm curious, like what you see on that.
Well, I think first and foremost, it's about setting, I hate to harken back to the strategic plan, but the strategic plan is your guiding principle. It's your aligning document that really says, here's our mission, our vision, here's what we're going to deliver, and here's how we're going to pay for it. I mean, and and this is the same thing that you do at home when you're balancing your checkbook, if people even do that anymore. But where you say, I got this much money coming in, I got this much money going out, what's left so I can do some extra stuff. I mean, it really is that fundamental. I mean, and at its heart, it's complicated. It takes time, it takes resource to be able to do those things. And it takes considerable communication. And, when you look at sort of all of the pitfalls of any kind of major initiative, any kind of, you want a new program, when things fall apart, it can always harken back to failure to plan, failure to communicate, and failure to help people adopt to the change. And this is, kind of fundamental stuff. It's what I studied in my dissertation, really. If I think about why does stuff not go well? And it's not failing to plan and understand the objectives, failing to communicate across, and failing to prepare people for the change. Because if we're going to add something new, if the development folks aren't in there understanding the objective we're asking of them, if the planning on the program side doesn't have the parameters that they can work in, finite parameters, then you've just got groups off doing things and you end up with failure.
Right. And I think that is what is so interesting about your next tip that we need to really be looking at. And that's the benchmarking on, both sides, all sides, however you want to call it. Is I feel like benchmarking a lot of times falls to the finance team, and then they're like the deliverers of the bad news, right? Versus making it a little bit more organic and accountable at the same time, like getting everyone around the table. And I'm wondering, you've mentioned this several times. You see this as a monthly exercise, or how do we get not just a report that gets emailed out, but something so that people can ask questions? And because the other thing I want to ask you about is I feel like programming doesn't always understand what the same things that the finance team understands and what they're looking for. And I'm wondering how we get those conversations more aligned with the benchmarking.
Well, maybe I'll just start with what I do at JMT. And we actually review all of my operations teams and the sales teams, right? Because, again, for us, revenue in is through sales.
Correct.
And, revenue out, if you will, our expenses are around mainly people, but we have to pay for software and lots of stuff. But we also have key performance indicators around how we are doing across all of our functional areas that are, again, in pursuit of our mission, which is to support nonprofits and see them become successful. So we're looking at our KPI performance every month, and not just with here's what we did, that's great, but with what is the trend, what's working, what's not working, what adjustments do we need to make? Does a change in performance with clients that's perhaps reducing satisfaction impact reputation, which could impact sales? So right, it's a whole full circle. And the expectation of all of the team, from the managerial and staff perspective, is it's not just what was that number and check the box. It's what are we going to do with this information? What key action items do we take if we're off track with a goal? If we're on track with a goal, how can we leverage that information to help support the rest of the organization? So we're benchmarking organizationally continuously. And what we're really doing is trying to understand how do we drive improvement towards our mission and our goals. And that review of those KPIs is how we get there.
Yeah, really interesting. And I love that you said that it's understanding, again, very strategic, going back to your strategic plan, understanding what it is you're trying to do, and then navigating all the things that you have to get through in order to achieve those metrics and understand that. So thank you for kind of giving us that lens, because I think it's something that it seems to me, Stephanie, and I don't know what you see across the sector, but it seems to me that this is not always a best practice, or a common practice, I should say. It is a best practice, but it's not a common practice until there's been a stress or crisis. And I'm wondering if you see that or not.
I think that, when we think about budgeting in particular, there is sort of this notion of it's the finance team's job and I don't need to worry about these things. And I do think that you get the silo effect, right? It's finance. I don't have to worry about that. That's, they'll if there's something going on, they'll tell me if I can't spend money, right? Like it's kind of that approach versus I believe the executive leadership team of the organization are all accountable for understanding all of those KPIs. Even if they're not responsible for delivering a KPI, they are accountable as executive leaders for understanding the breadth of the KPIs, the breadth of the strategy, and how the organization is performing around both the strategy and those key performance indicators, because they all have a stake in it, right? And it's not that's this person's job or that person's job. And not to be repetitive, but it comes back to, did we plan? Are we communicating? Are we acting together? Not just saying it's finance's job. And are we addressing and adopting whatever techniques we need to adjust and change and modify? I'm a firm believer, which might be coming up in our questions, but there are lots of tools and techniques that can help an organization do these things, whether it's software, whether it's just sort of best practice things. There's free templates. There's all sorts of ways to help an organization, again, create their strategic plan, link that plan back to a very specific budgeting approach and scenario planning. And then how are you reviewing, measuring KPI over time and addressing, the changes you might need.
Right. Well, as we finish up today, because we don't have a lot of time, but I really did want to spend more time on this, and that's the communication. You've brought that up several times. We all hear things differently. We see things differently. Now we are working in a remote environment. How does this get communicated? Is it like pie charts? Is it like everything, or is it just a three top items? What are some strategies that maybe we should really look at so that we are communicating effectively?
So, that's a little bit, I would say that's going to be subjective, by organization, how deep they go into the trends, and I can talk about the techniques we employ. Where we hit top line, how's the revenue going? We hit bottom line, how is the expense going? And therefore, are we exceeding our plan from an expense to a revenue to an expense level? And at minimum, when you're talking about the entire organization, that's probably the right kind of communication. I think at as you move up into leadership roles, it's important probably to go a couple layers deeper. And communicate where there are risks and stressors. You don't want to panic people, right? That's never the intention, but it is important for people to understand where the organization is and how it's doing against its objectives, because you want everybody bought in to the mission and understanding what is needed as an organization to progress. So I think there's some organizational subjectivity on how detailed the communication goes, but for sure, everyone should understand at least a high level how we're doing and what can they do to support that mission and improve trends or objectives.
So I'm going to throw this out to you because
Yeah.
last week I was meeting with a development team of a very important organization in our state. And we started talking about communication. And I asked the team, I'm like, does everybody in the organization, the board members all the way down to your staff, understand what your goals are, your fundraising goals are, and where you are in terms of revenue? And how do you talk about that? And the development director said that once they started communicating to everybody about what their annual goal was and where they were, it bubbled up a lot of stress. And their comment was they felt like it imbued fear. And when the development director would walk through the front doors of the office, people would be like, "Where are we? Where are we?" Like, kind of like, "Are we going to have jobs?" And I thought it was fascinating to hear that, because you just said there's a fear factor that can easily get out of control. So I'm wondering if you have any tips for us to help mitigate that level of communication. I mean, I know this is like a huge question to ask you right as we're wrapping up, but it's really, to me, quite fascinating.
Yeah, human nature is such that people are gonna hear things and panic, and that's why I said there's sort of a continuum of what you communicate and the how you communicate it. You don't want people quitting, you don't want people panicking. Most I believe most people that are working in nonprofits are there because, particularly in the development side and the program side, they have a passion for that mission, and are motivated not just by a paycheck, but motivated by what that organization is delivering. And I'm a fairly strong believer that you need to be reasonably transparent. You don't need to get down into, again, the nitty gritty, but people do need to understand at a big picture level, how are we doing? And if there are areas that we're not getting there. I mean, go back to my price of gas example.
Yeah.
Like, if we're like in the transport, we've got to spend money transporting people and gas prices skyrocket. That's like a real concern. And, how can how can the organization think about, and you never know who's going to have a brilliant idea. How can we mitigate this unplanned expense because gas prices suddenly went crazy? And that's a real example. I mean, in the for-profit world, airlines literally live or die by the price of gas, and they buy it. They buy futures in gas prices to try and manage those costs. So I'm just, there are real things beyond did we get the revenue in that can impact, that dollars in, dollars out equation. So again, you don't want people to panic. And so the crucial message has to be not just here's where we are, but here's what we're doing about it. And here's how you, as a volunteer, as an employee, can support and help this. Because again, it's not a me thing or just every single individual can contribute and help move the needle. And that's so the message has to be reasonable, it has to be clear, and it has to communicate action and how everyone can contribute toward that action.
I love it. Well, You are always very, very wise, and you help us move the needle on the nonprofit show. Dr. Stephanie Rose-Belcher, she is the Chief Operating Officer at JMT Consulting. Check out jmtconsulting.com. You can learn more about the JMT team. It is a woman-owned and women-led organization. I want to brag on you all and your Innovate Summit that you have every year. Innovate 2026 will be coming up next spring, and we'll be talking more about that. But what a great opportunity for us to have you share your wisdom with all of us on the Nonprofit Show. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you for having me, Julia.
It's been a lot of fun. Hey, we have amazing supporters like JMT with us daily. They also include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Interim Executives Academy, Your Part-Time Controller, and Fundraisers Friday. As we end each and every episode, we leave with this message, and it goes like this: to stay well so you can do well.